Thank you, Amy. Thank you, and I just want to acknowledge the IOGCC for their continued collaboration and cooperation in preparing everyone for these webinars, and also to our state partners. I want to directly thank you all. It's plugging season, and certainly all of you are hard at work. I think our last that we read were over 4,000 wells plugged due to your hard work in the field, incredible accomplishments. And today we seek to answer some of your questions that you posed a few weeks ago related to funding and assistance. And with this technical assistance seminar, you'll see some familiar faces. Eleni Saris with the Interior Business Center and Nancy Lewis with the Solicitor's Office, and also some of the Orphaned Well Program Office Environmental Protection Specialist Neil Zimba will be presenting, as well as from the administration, Peter Gallagher as an advisor to the program. So I just want to thank you all for your attention and emphasize I couldn't be more appreciative of the work you do. Shout out to Ohio for hosting not only our environmental protection specialist, Jim, but graciously agreeing also to have the Office of the Inspector General present, where they're, I've mentioned that we have a lot of oversight on these funds and they're overseeing us. So thank you for everything that you all are doing to cross every T, dot every I, and really zero in on how do we manage these funds in a way that will hold us accountable to all stakeholders. So thank you so very much for all that you do. And with that, I'll turn it over to Eleni. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me. So welcome to the Orphaned Well Grant Guidance Informational Webinar. We're most fortunate to have IOGC hosting again. For those of you that may have attended earlier this month, we had another seminar to answer Q&A. My name is Eleni Saris, and I'm a Grant Management Officer for the Interior Business Center, which is part of the U.S. Department of Interior. I will be presenting today along with Nancy Davis of DOI's Office of Solicitor. And as Kimber mentioned, we're really delighted to have with us Peter Gallagher and Neil Zimba, also of the Orphaned Well Program Office, to present. One of the most important things I've learned in my career is the critical role that federal financial assistance plays in strengthening the capacity of our agencies to fulfill their mission. Develop innovative projects like Orphaned Well Grant Guidance, and provide measurable results to our most pressing environmental challenges. Thank you for attending today's presentation to learn more about this exciting new grant program. Just a quick reminders before we begin using Zoom, and I think Amy went over these pretty thoroughly, but just so that you know, thank you for muting your microphone until we're ready to do the Q&A. And then we'll enable your camera at that time. So we are going to hold questions until the end of the presentation. Today's session will be recorded and the recording is already on. Okay, let's get going. So the purpose of today's webinar is just to provide a general overview of the Orphaned Well program, in particular the formula grant guidance. This webinar will be an additional training and information sessions covering the Davis-Bacon Act, Buy American, Build America preference, and best management practices. As with any grant program, please check with the grant management officer at IBC and OWPO to address any specific needs that you may have. This webinar is not inclusive of all the grant management policies and procedures needed to apply and manage an award. So I'm just going to turn off. I'm going to pause the screen just a minute. I'm going to make a change here. So give me just a second. Okay, Sorry about that. There you go. Hopefully you should still be able to see the screen. If you have any issues, just let me know. Okay, I'm going to turn over this presentation. Whoops, it went 2 slides. Let me turn it over to Peter Gallagher, who's from the OWPO office, to talk a little bit more in depth on the phases and formula grant process.
Thanks, Eleni. Just a few quick slides here to kind of level set us all and go over some overview points on the formula grant guidance and process. So we are currently in the application window for phase 1 of formula grants. And as was made clear in the formula grant guidance and the FAQ document that was released by the department on July 10th, states will have an opportunity to apply annually for formula grants in up to 6 phases. And the current application window goes through December 31st of this year. And so this will be a rolling application process. States have until that period to submit their phase 1 applications. And I would recommend you check out the FAQ document and the formula grant guidance for more questions on that phasing, requirements around it, and the options that have been extended to states in order to receive their formula grant amounts. Next slide, please. So then this is just something everyone should be familiar with, the phase 1 eligibility amounts for each state. Again, phase 1 and for all future phases, states are eligible to apply for up to a $25 million grant or 1/4 of their total formula grant eligibility, whichever of the two is greater. You don't have to apply for your full eligible amount. You can apply for up to this amount, and you don't have to apply in any single phase. You can wait until phase 2 or 3 or later if you'd like to do that, if that is your preference. And again, questions around that, feel free to go to the FAQ document or reach out to us if you do have any additional questions on it. Next slide, please. So just some key elements that are in the formula grant guidance, quickly run over those. First is methane emissions. States must screen for methane emissions from each well that's plugged with formula grant funds. And if methane is detected above the background levels, states need to measure the rate of that leak before and after plugging the well. And in July, we released updated methane guidelines / protocol on the department's website that hopefully provides more clarity to states and how to go about doing that. So I would suggest you check out those updated guidelines. And again, those federal guidelines are just the floor requirement, and states can point to other protocols or methodologies that they may feel are more robust than those federal guidelines in their applications that they intend to follow. On the topic of environmental justice and disadvantaged communities, states are asked to factor into their project prioritizations orphaned wells within 0.5 miles of communities of color, low-income communities, and tribal and indigenous communities. And again, I think there's some information on the FAQ document around how the department will go about working with states to implement this requirement, given that states do have existing prioritization processes in place. So we look forward to working with states during the application process to ensure that we do factor in these wells into states' approaches to plugging and remediating well sites. And then finally, surface water and groundwater contamination. States are asked to evaluate each well site for potential surface water and groundwater impacts following whatever state protocols and procedures they do have in place as it relates to evaluating sites for these potential impacts. Next slide, please. And in the formula grant, states must update the DOI data reporting template in conjunction with the quarterly and final reporting requirements. I do believe that some states are doing that now with their initial grants, but we're asking all states to do that with the formula grants once those awards are made. And the department is currently working to update that template to improve its ease of use by states based on feedback that we got from the IOGCC Groundwater Protection Council Data Management Work Group. So hopefully the updates that we make to that template will make it easier for states to use and will result in a better collection, ease of use for states going forward. And so we hope to have updated template to share with you all in the next several weeks, if not sooner. Next slide, and I think this is back to you, Eleni.
Let me come off mute. So here's a couple of the application steps that are needed to get your application documents and to get going with the process. So just some quick reminders about pre-application steps. First, there is a requirement that your agency be enrolled in the Department of Treasury's ASAP, as well as in Grant Solutions. Many of your agencies are already in, and I've sent some emails out last month with information about how to use Grant Solutions. You also want to be sure when you're starting your application process that you have a copy of the program guidance and the Q&A documents. If you don't have copies, there are web links at the end of our presentation that contain that information. You want to submit your application by December 31st. So please don't wait till the last minute, maybe sometime over the holidays, prior to the holidays, to try to get into Grant Solutions, to try to access these documents. Let's try to do that the next couple of months. And if there are any issues with access, we can work to address them and get you what you need to be successful. You can download forms and templates from Grant Solutions, or you can use the online versions. Remember that Grant Solutions is your application portal. So that is new for this year. So with your ASAP enrollment, which is what many of you are quite familiar with the ASAP. You may not be the payment requester or the person that manages it for your agency, but keep in mind that you want to be sure that you're enrolled. I believe most of the states that are on this call are enrolled, but there may be a few that are new to state initial grants and new to the formula process. And so as you proceed with the award process, if you are not already enrolled or your enrollment is not active, we will be contacting you and providing you with additional information. Always be sure, for those of you who do have access to ASAP, that you log in once every 90 days, or else you're going to face a lockout. And you have to call the help desk to get a new password. So also what's coming online, and we emailed you all, I believe on August 1st, is their ASAP is switching to two-factor authentication, which is ID Me, and that will start on September 16th. Again, if you haven't had an opportunity and you have direct access to ASAP, now is a great time to start that two-factor authentication process. In case you run into any hitches, you're able to resolve them before they go live on September 16th. And there is a handout or a hyperlink in this presentation that will provide you with additional information on how to do that. We will also send out another reminder at the end of the month, in case you missed the first one, about the changes to ASAP. Also, in addition, if you don't have access to ASAP and would like access to ASAP, contact your financial person or payment requester for your agency and see. There's a lot of great reports you can download that can help you prepare your SF425s. And there's some other tools you can use just to have read-only access into ASAP. Reimbursement by ASAP is part of our standard terms and conditions at DOI. The reimbursement is by drawdown in ASAP. Any state formula award will be on a reimbursement basis. You have the option within ASAP to be reimbursed in two different ways. FedWire allows you to receive reimbursements often the same day and within 15 minutes to 2 hours of your request for payment. The automated clearinghouse, or ACH, reimbursement may take up to 2 or 3 business days. If you're not sure how your reimbursement process works at your state, please check with your financial officer who has access to ASAP for more information. In addition, your state may have additional fiscal rules that you must follow in order to seek reimbursement. Transaction testing is conducted to ensure that funds are used according to the approved budget and project work. Transaction testing may include receipts, time and effort statements, copies of contracts and invoices, and general ledger documentation for a particular reimbursement request or a series of reimbursement requests. This can be done at any time by the federal awarding agency. Please keep in mind that IBC's and OWPO's monitoring for financial and programmatic activities includes access to recipient records and documents pursuant to 2 CFR 200, Section 337 and 339. Periodic transaction testing is done to ensure that costs are allowable, reasonable, and allocable under the agreement's terms and conditions. As a reminder, all costs for the award need to be traced to the level of expenditure. It is a requirement to receive federal financial assistance to be enrolled in the System for Award Management, or SAM.gov. Your listing may allow for the acceptance of financial assistance or all awards, which means contracts and federal financial assistance. In April of 2022, DUNS numbers were phased out and the System for Award Management transitioned to the Unique Identifier Number, or UEIs. All of your agencies now have a UEI number. When you access the Grant Solutions application portal and use the online version of forms, you will notice that UEI number auto-populates and is captured in your Grant Solutions account already. Having issues with SAM, here are some free resources provided to you by the government, including Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, or PTACs, and the Federal Service Desk from SAM. Included on the slides are hyperlinks to these resources to help keep your SAM registration current, including points of contact. Please keep in mind that your registration must be current at the time of award. If you're having issues with renewing your UEI or your SAM registration, please contact us. Our system directly interfaces with SAM.gov. So if there is a registration issue, we will not be able to make an award. Grant Solutions is a financial assistance management software program that enables federal agencies to manage grants and cooperative agreements through the entire award lifecycle. Grant Solutions will streamline many current financial assistance management tasks through automation and standardization. Grant Solutions creates a single system where funding applicants, federal staff, and award recipients can perform and monitor the status of their respective awards. Grant Solutions allows you as the applicant or recipient to have greater access to review documents and request amendments. However, please keep in mind that all awards and amendments must be signed by a federal financial assistance officer. You will still receive email communications from our office and your assigned financial assistance officer. One more thing I will point out on this previous slide. There is a hyperlink in here of how to apply for a directed announcement. Some of you have reached out to us about how to do that. And there's both a handout as well as step-by-step video instructions. So I just want to point that out on the slide. And you will receive a copy of this presentation. And if you really need some assistance about how to apply, please reach out and we'll try to set up a time to kind of walk you through that process. So here is the funding opportunity announcement, like just a screenshot of what it might look like if you were in Grant Solutions at this particular moment. On this slide is the steps you need to initiate the application process for a state formula award. This is the only award opportunity that is currently listed in Grant Solutions that you would be eligible to apply for. You would log into the system, which means you need to have access first. And you're going to go and hover on the tab that says funding opportunities. And you're going to look for this particular funding opportunity that is captured on the screen. I have assigned the respective states that are contained in the funding list shared earlier in the presentation by Peter access to the funding opportunity announcement. You may click apply to begin the process. Files may be completed using the online versions contained in Grant Solutions, or you may download them and upload them back into the system as an attachment. Each item will take multiple attachments. I believe they take up to, I think each attachment can be, or multiple attachments can, as long as they stay within, I think it is 10 or 15 megabytes. And I'm sure most of your documents are not that big. If you are having issues with uploading and it is maxing out, you can certainly put the application in another area. It is listed by item. So just some quick handy reminders. Some of the forms you complete very easily online are the kind of in the first section here, which is the SF424, the 424A, the project abstract, and the standard form for lobbying disclosure, or the disclosure of lobbying activities. So those could be very easy to complete and may save you quite a bit of time. Also too, I'll note that you can add in comments within each of the item numbers. So you could put additional comments if you wish to let us know what's contained in the attachment. And that's super helpful too, and so that we can get a more complete package. And here's what the application kit actually looks like in the system. So the first section, as I kind of alluded to in the prior slide, contains online versions of forms that you may use. And these you can type directly into the system, and it will allow you to save them. And if you miss anything, it will have a little red asterisk and say you're missing a field. So that's super helpful too in us receiving more complete packages. In addition, if you hover over some of the questions, it'll pop up a window that has instructions or what they're looking for. So again, that's super helpful than having to pull out the instruction sheets separately on the form and try to read where you're at and find out what the correct, what information is really being sought and how you should best answer that question. So all the online forms are here that you can complete. So super simple. And the great thing is these online versions of forms will pre-populate with your agency name, the funding opportunity number, your UEI number, and some really good basic information. So that's super helpful and should ease the application process. Also, you can use your mouse to hover over questions and receive answers. You'll also notice here in the program narrative, we have a work plan proposal, which is just a holding spot to upload if you use your own template that you've created. We also have the suggested template right here. And if you go into this section, you're going to want to download the document in its original format. So be sure when you hover over it and you want to download it, that you say original version. If you don't, it will auto convert the document to a PDF. So the suggested work plan template is a Word document, so you can make edits and changes and add in your information. But if you don't select original version, you're going to get a PDF, and that's not going to be as useful for you. So you have two options: to either upload your own or to download the suggested template, complete it, and then re-upload it into the system. And then also too, we have additional information that's required to be submitted. This is directly out of the program guidance. You have your detailed budget proposal justification. Again, that's a placeholder. If you create your own and you're going to use your own template, you can upload it there. We also have a lobbying certification, which is also required. That is in addition to the disclosure form, which is the SFLLL. This is a different form, and this will also need to be signed and completed. You're going to have to download it. It's a PDF, or you can go out to grants.gov and get your own copy. And then also we have the attachment A, which is the state certification for Davis-Bacon and insurances. That is a form in PDF that you can download. And then also too, we loaded in the suggested template for budget justification. Again, a handy reminder, when you download it, select original version, which will then populate into an Excel spreadsheet. And you can make edits and changes, obviously, to enter in your data. So here's just a reminder of the complete application package and what we need in order to move your application forward to review. So be sure you've completed all of these or submitted all of these documents. Again, you're going to get pinged in Grant Solutions. If you didn't add something, it'll look like an error. It'll do a check on your package. So if for some reason something didn't upload or you forgot to fill it out, you're going to get reminded. So this is super helpful to have the ability to just enter information directly into the system. And then finally, here's the other elements, just reminders again, the work plan and proposal is identified and spelled out in the program guidance. There isn't a particular OMB form, but there is an OMB requirement. So go out to the program guidance, you can look at the information that is contained therein, or you can use the suggested work plan template, which includes instructions that might assist you in more adequately responding to all the questions and more completely. Again, with the detailed budget proposal and justification is also required with your SF424A. So we need to have a budget breakdown that justifies and supports the costs. In addition, we need to have a determination of what are your administrative costs. So again, a suggested budget template is available and you can use it. You can develop your own. We just ask you as you use the templates that if you want to create your own to respond, that it's really good to use the templates instructions and just use them as a guide so that you make sure you cover all of the areas. We find that, it's just easy when there's a lot of work to be done to prepare a grant application that may involve a lot of different people participating, to have a roadmap of kind of how to go through the different steps. And the templates do a really good job of covering all of that, as well as explaining why it's important and kind of giving you a rundown on the terminology or what we're actually seeking. And then finally, we have the negotiated indirect cost rate agreement. If applicable, you can upload that into Grant Solutions, as well as the state certification. And just an overview too of how to fill out your SF424. In the past, you would download a form from grants.gov and you would have to put this information in. You're certainly welcome to download it, but if you download it at Grant Solutions, a lot of this information will pre-populate for you, which is super helpful. However, if you're going to fill it out by hand and type it up, here's just some information you're going to need to complete your application. And project abstract. This is something that is relatively new. We've been doing this the last couple of years. It is an OMB requirement. So the purpose of the project abstract is really to inform the general public without specific knowledge or experience regarding the funded project or program. So it should inform them of the following items in the bullet points. Keep in mind that award descriptions should be written in plain language, avoiding agency-specific terminology and technical jargon. You can click on the hyperlink in this slide for the assistance listing, which can help you structure what information needs to be contained in your project abstract. In the bullet points are all of the required elements for the project abstract summary. What makes a good project abstract is detailing your proposed work plan and program as if you were explaining it to a member of the public who may be unfamiliar with orphan wells and how your program benefits the public with measurable outcomes. I'm going to turn it over to Neil Zimba, who is going to present this slide on the elements of a complete work plan.
Thank you, Elaine. Good good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm going to spend a few minutes here kind of discussing one of the key parts of the application, which is the actual proposal and work plan and description of what you're going to do with the grant funding. What this slide does is shows kind of more general requirements that are kind of applicable to almost all grants. We're looking for something that explains the project or program in detail. What activities are you planning to use the grant funding for? What kind of outcomes are you going to get, and what kind of data collection might be involved? It should give a basis for what your technical approach that you're working with, and identifying what your goals and objectives for the grant funding is. We ask that you describe what public benefit, what is the outcomes you're going to get from using the grant funds, and how will success be measured and evaluated over the course of the grant. We encourage you to include maps, delineating project areas, list of wells, any kind of information that can illustrate, to the extent you have your project more defined at this timeline. And then a key part is to include a timeline overall for how you intend to implement the program under the grant, including setting some milestones accord, so that essentially we can evaluate as we go along. And it should have a monitoring plan of how you would be monitoring the performance of contractors or any sub-recipients that you would be using in your grant. So these are just kind of the general outlines of what is expected in a proposal work plan. You'll find in the state formula grants guidance, we provide some kind of detailed questions and information that we're asking for. And there's two specific sections to look at. One is in the section 4, instructions for the application. There's a separate section regarding the work plan proposal that begins on page 8. And then the next section to keep in mind is section 5, which identifies standards, various standards for measurement, plugging, remediation, and workforce. And that's what I'm going to go into a little more right now. So next slide, Eleni. So as I said, those are the two key sections, as you see identified in the bullet. And we realize we're asking a lot of information, and there's a lot of questions detailed in that guidance. So we have developed a optional template for the work plan proposal. And the point was to kind of take all of these various requests we have that are laid out in several pages in the guidance, but organize it into some logical sections that fully incorporate all the requests and questions in the guidance, that where when you pull it all together, it will be a really coherent and well outlined work plan proposal that will be readily able to kind of follow the flow of what you're planning to do with the grant money and how you'll implement the program. So I'm going to kind of walk through it. And what you'll see if you download the template and take a look is we've broken out into an outline, as I said, kind of a logical group of sections. And then we've actually pulled these specific sections where a question or a request was in the guidance. We reference it so you can kind of cross-check back to the guidance. But essentially, if you follow this template, you'll be essentially meeting all the requirements and information we ask for in the guidance. So the first section of it is kind of general, more program information, overall program information, with a section first on your general state orphan well program. What's your definitions of orphan wells or abandoned wells? What types of standards in terms of plugging, restoration you might have? What's your regulatory authority for things such as access? And what types of processes do you have for, say, identifying responsible parties and seeing if you can obtain funding from them for that? So you'll see there's a number of these type of general program questions in there. Then it moves into a section on summarizing your well prioritization. So this is what is your established well prioritization process, whether it's by law or regulation. And then ask the questions, as Peter mentioned, in terms of the guidance. We're looking for also how you can incorporate making sure high methane emitters get prioritized in the program, as well as taking into account orphan wells that are near disadvantaged communities and working that into the prioritization of the wells that you use the funding to implement here. We'll then have a section asking, how do you want to go about measuring emissions of methane and other gases? This could be part, whether you're planning to do it through contracting out and have contractors to do it, or whether you're going to train state personnel using equipment perhaps you may be purchasing. So we're looking for those kind of details of how you intend to measure methane gases. Basically, how would you be meeting the protocol that Peter mentioned that we have just updated, or is there another methodology that meets those requirements, such as the American Carbon Registry methodology, where you're planning to use that? In the section on site remediation and restoration, we're asking for what's your process for screening for soil, groundwater, surface water contamination. Also, as a practical matter, how do you implement things like this? I know some states, you may hand off projects to other agencies if there is a larger remediation issue. So explain that. What is your state process and program for addressing those type of issues? We also ask for what any workforce development or related activities you might be doing in this area. Are you supporting any training or apprenticeship programs? Have any partnerships to develop the workforce, given that having enough trained people to do all this work we're doing is definitely an issue that's been identified. We also ask what type of coordination processes you might have to coordinate with federal agencies or tribes regarding of wells that may be near areas where you're working and that there. Next slide, please. So the next section of the template, this is really the key section. It's really the kind of work plan portion of the template, where we're asking you to lay out, describe the specific tasks and activities to be conducted, and lay out a preliminary work schedule. Back in some of the earlier frequently asked questions on the guidance, there was a question about, well, how can you lay it out in terms of the full details? Some of these programs and projects you may be proposing may go out 4 or 5 years, and it may be that maybe only the earlier activities are well defined, whereas it may be you have to go through processes, well prioritization processes, develop well specifications, go through your procurement. Well, lay those general tasks and activities out in a logical manner into a preliminary work schedule. We're also looking to identify kind of proposed performance goals. So this would include some milestones. Some milestones can be strictly activity related, of say, complete prioritization of wells to be funded under this grant. So that may have one particular date, and the output from that is essentially the list of wells you intend to contract with for plugging. The other portion would be more of what's in this next section, which is the estimate of program outcomes. Is what is the overall benefit you expect to get from your program? What's your forecast of, say, the number of wells you're going to have plugged, remediated, or restored? We realize these will just be estimates at this point, but based on your experience, your previous costs and everything, the idea would be to give what is your estimate of how much progress will be made with the funding that's provided. And that would include what your projected cost of plugging, remediating, or reclaiming wells. And so part of the part of this is also looking at, based on your wells, an estimate of the cost that might be partially offset by financial assurance instruments, forfeited bonds, and any other proceeds such as salvage that could be put back into the program. But the key part will be then include a timeline that has these projected milestones and outcomes. So again, some of the milestones would be strictly more activity based of completing tasks, beginning and completing tasks, whereas others would be more of outcomes of the expectation of, we think we'll have plugged 50 wells in the first year. And the idea would be to just provide essentially some goals that over time, as we're monitoring, we can measure progress towards meeting those goals. Obviously, conditions will change, things will come up. It may be that costs are higher. You may ended up having more wells with large remediation issues that had to be addressed than you originally planned. So we know these numbers will move. The idea is to make your estimate based on where you think what you think you can accomplish with these funds. And then as we go along through the performance reporting, you can kind of indicate to us changes based on what is actually happening out in the field. So the final part of this would be to include a timeline, either through a table with the specific performance goals or milestones, or using some sort of graphical means like a Gantt chart to show a preliminary schedule of activities going forward. Next slide, Eleni. Then there's a few other final sections that we propose, and one is a project monitoring and evaluation plan, and this is how you will measure performance. Our expectation is part of it is with identifying these kind of goals and projected outcomes in, that'll be part of how to measure performance. And that would also be how, from the department's perspective, as we monitor progress on these projects, everything, we'll be looking at those goals and how well you're doing on that as well. And then also, if you have any specific sub-recipients you are planning to make subawards to, how would you evaluate their progress, as well as how you would generally evaluate your contractor performance going forward. There's also a section for you to list key personnel and their responsibilities for your program, as well as some description of experience and qualification. And if any specific contractors or consultants are known that you plan to use, some description of their qualifications as well. And then a final section is, and this is only if applicable, if you're planning to use the formula grant funding to leverage that with other funding available, say state funding, to carry out the project, please describe that to us as well. So in the end, if you've kind of followed this template, you'll basically be answering all the questions we asked for in the guidance, as it should be in a fairly logical outline, and it'll be a strong work plan and proposal. And just a final note, this is completely suggested. You can prepare your work plan proposal in whatever format you want to, or you can modify and reorganize this template, if you will. The key, though, is to ensure in the end that all the requested elements in the guidance have been covered in some way. So one option is you could use the template as almost a checklist to see that you actually are kind of answering the questions we're looking for in that. And so that's kind of the piece of the template. So I'm going to turn it back over to Eleni to talk a little bit about the budget aspect.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to go over real briefly. I think I covered it a little bit previously when we talked about grant solutions, about how to get the detailed budget justification and narrative. It is an Excel worksheet. So keep in mind that we're trying to find a kind of a better way to track expenses and make it both easier for you to submit a complete package and for us to review it. A good budget narrative always includes a justification statement. So within the spreadsheet, there is a way that you can annotate it. And then there's also a box at the bottom that you can add in additional information. You're welcome to include attachments as well, such as bids or quotes. So all related costs must be included in the appropriate cost category. So we want you to be mindful of what is personnel versus contracted personnel expenses. We also want to be sure that we can distinguish what is an administrative cost versus a program or project cost, because obviously these awards are subject to a 10% limitation. Nancy Lewis from the Solicitor's Office will talk a little bit more about that in the presentation. Remember that these also need to be unduplicated costs and cannot be charged to another award, such as a state initial award. So you want to be sure you've created a clear audit trail that traces the expenditure according to the appropriate award and cost category. It's always a good idea to have a review done by a financial and program official to be sure that you catch errors when you use and develop your costs. You know, sometimes it can be a simple mathematical error, or it can be just accidentally duplicating a cost from one category to another. So it is a requirement in the program guidance to submit a detailed budget narrative that justifies each line of expense. As an example, when requesting costs for equipment, please be sure to include a justification of why the equipment is needed, how it relates to the project. So how is it going to make your project or program better? And if the equipment will be used exclusively for the program. Include how you determine the cost estimate, such as market research, vendor quotes, and the like. Also consider if leasing equipment may be a cheaper and better way than purchasing it. So detailed budget narratives justify each cost item, and a calculation basis or cost basis is determined. The budget narrative includes a methodology of how costs were determined. So did you base it, you know, salary costs are typically scheduled at states. So you may have you know, state personnel schedule may be what you use and how you determine raises and things like that. And also too, with your budget, the particular template that we have, it has instructions over each cost category, but they are by no means all of the instructions needed. As you well know, there is the cost principles for the uniform guidance that covers a lot of detail about how costs are viewed in the federal grant context, which may be different than in the state context. So keep in mind you're managing to the federal context, but you also have to be mindful of whatever other procedures and processes that you have in place. We also want to ensure that there's a detailed breakdown of administrative costs. It's a lot easier for us to ask you up front than have you submit a budget and then have us try to make an ascertain what is administrative costs and what isn't administrative costs, and then have us go back and have you revise your budget. So creating that up front and having detailed explanation of the activities that personnel are going to be doing will help us delineate some of that. If you don't use the budget detail narrative, you're certainly that we've included, you can model something that perhaps will work for you in your state better, but certainly use that as a guide to create what you need to in order to be sure that you've covered every cost category with adequate justification so that we can proceed with issuing an award. So the suggested budget template is already loaded in Grant Solutions as an Excel spreadsheet. As I said earlier in the presentation, be sure that you download the version that says original version so that you may get it in a Excel format. There is a particular tab for administrative costs versus project costs, and general instructions are included above each cost tab and category. You're also welcome to upload additional attachments with your budget detail narrative if that's helpful, or provides additional detail that you couldn't fit into the spreadsheet. You can do that in a Word format, Excel, whatever works best for you. You may modify the template as needed, and keep in mind that you want to have access to the program guidance as you complete the step. Instructions, and there's a hyperlink in this slide on completing the SF424A and uniform guidance subpart cost principles. I'm going to turn this over to Nancy Lewis from the Department of Interior Solicitor's Office to talk a little bit about drones and unmanned aircraft.
Hello, everybody. Good to see all of you again, even though I can't see you, but I know you are all out there. I'm going to go through a bunch of slides and different terms and conditions and other definitions. Some of it I already said last week, but for those of you who didn't attend last week, we decided it was worth repeating. Okay, so let's start with unmanned aircraft systems, otherwise known as drones. Okay, so we understand the need or the desire to use drones. I know you want to, test your methane, or maybe you want to go out and find more orphaned wells. And we understand it, and but we also know that with all the good, there's still potential for malicious activity, maybe by terrorists or other foreign entities. And because of that, when you're using federal financial assistance, you are prohibited to purchase drones and even parts of drones from certain non-USA or from certain entities. So on this slide, you can see a website, and that lists approved drone aircrafts that can be purchased or rented. It's not always up to date, so make sure you check in with us. And just keep in mind that, even if you have to just keep in mind that this applies to any aspect of using a drone. So it also means that if you have pilots that are manning the drone must be on that approved list. The takeaway from the slide is to reach out to us, let us know, get approval, and then use your drone to plug more wells. Okay, next slide. So we're going to talk about administrative costs, and Eleni mentioned it earlier. So administrative costs are expenses that are incurred to support the day-to-day operations of your state working project for the wells. They are not directly tied to the specific program. All right, if they are direct costs, they consist of salaries, travel, equipment, supplies, but it's not linked directly to actually plugging wells. And when we talk about indirect costs, we're talking about the rent and utilities. So it again doesn't have any tie to plugging wells. You don't really see it. It's kind of indirect utilities, but you have to pay for them in order to operate. You must include a breakdown of all your costs. And if you have questions about administrative costs, please reach out and let us know. And remember that you are capped at 10% of the award to administrative costs. Next slide. Okay, so carbon credits, and this is kind of this has been a new question lately, and they are not allowed. So you cannot use federal grant money to make money or generate or collect carbon credits. Okay, so to allow the carbon credits, we're kind of taking away the intent of the legislation. We're not meeting the requirement of the legislation to achieve a net reduction in methane. Okay, so when we collect these carbon credits for profit and then we transfer them somewhere else, and it's not just carbon, it's other gases as well, we transfer them to a third party, we're just moving ownership elsewhere. We're not reducing methane, and that is the intent of the bill and the Orphan Well program. Furthermore, most of the time, we don't really have any idea where these carbon credits are going or what they're going to be used for and what purpose. So for now, carbon credits are not allowed, and this applies to contractors and subcontractors. Next slide. Okay, so during the last presentation, we talked a lot about, what type of, what creates a legal obligation. Okay, so a legal obligation is, a legal document that, puts the funding somewhere for a specific purpose. It's usually a contract or a subcontract or some type of some transaction like that, for orders for property or supplies. Okay. We mentioned in the last briefing that an MOU or an MOA, memorandum of understanding, memorandum of agreement, does not create that legal obligation. At least in the federal government, there's no transfer of funds, there's no consideration, so therefore it doesn't meet the standard of a legal documentation. But just keep in mind that when money is obligated, it's obligated to a specific type of project or purchase or order. Unobligated amounts are the funds that you don't have in a contractual agreement. So it's sitting out there and it's not tied to anything in the future. So money that you have been awarded in the grant that is not tied to a contract or something similar to a contract is called unobligated funds. Next slide. So these unobligated funds must be returned after 5 years, after the effective date of the grants. So when we say de-obligation, I realize that's probably confusing. It's de-obligation of the unobligated funds. We're saying that the funds aren't obligated, and that's why you have to return them. And when you're de-obligating them, you're actually de-obligating from the entire grant award. So that's where they're obligated by the federal government to the state to be used by the state. And then the state, if it's not obligated to be used elsewhere after 5 years, must return those funds back to the department. And the details of returning those funds will come later through the grants officers. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here are the various awards and terms, and I'm going to be going over most of them, and if I'm not, I'm sure someone else did. Next slide. All right, Davis-Bacon Act. So Davis-Bacon requires the state's contractors and subcontractors to pay prevailing wages, and that means base pay, kind of minimum base pay, plus any benefits like overtime or other benefits that they may receive. The work that's covered under Davis-Bacon is construction. And when I say construction, I mean like a new building or renovation to a previous existing building, but it also can include alteration and repair. It can even include painting and decorating. Okay, so anything over $2,000 that is in this work that is covered, and the Orphaned well plugging program is included in the work that's covered under Davis-Bacon. Must pay your laborers and your contractors, laborers and mechanics the prevailing wage and benefits for that particular location. Department of Labor is the lead in Davis-Bacon. We can answer some questions for you, but if they're very, very specific, we will refer you and help you get in touch with Department of Labor, because they are the ones that will do all the coordination and checking and guiding you on applying these prevailing wages. Okay, next slide. Okay, so Buy America, and I know that was a question during our last briefing. So the Buy America preference is part of the Orphaned Wells Grant Awards terms and conditions. So it's not always triggered, but it is a part of the infrastructure project. So the Buy America applies to one of three categories, and it can be iron and steel, manufactured products, or construction materials that are used for infrastructure projects under an award. And that's where we are, the infrastructure project. There has been a lot of guidance out lately from OMB about Buy America. Up until 2 years ago, before the bill, Buy America for federal financial assistance was, an option or a recommendation. It was not required, but it is required now, which was new to the federal financial world. So OMB has given more and more guidance. I just saw pre-guidance this morning, so it'll be coming out soon. And we will help you answer questions if you have about whether Buy America is triggered at some point during the Orphan Well plugging remediation reclamation project. Okay, so Buy America does not apply to anything that's not affixed to the ground, to the infrastructure project, and it doesn't apply to tools and equipment and supplies or anything kind of temporary. It doesn't apply to chairs or desks. And then construction material is being further defined, and that will be out soon. But keep in mind that Buy America does not apply to cement. So for the first part of your project, when you're pouring cement into wells, Buy America is not triggered. So as you move on for your projects, and I know this is probably going to be a question because everybody always asks, if it's on private land, does Buy America, is it triggered if you're on private land? Because the guidance, and a lot when you read about Buy America, it says if it's on private land, it has to be on public purpose, public land. The guidance that we have from OMB doesn't make it so clear cut anymore. So, obviously if it's for a public purpose and it's on public land, BABA is going to apply. But when you're talking about private land, you're still talking about a public purpose. So we're reducing methane in the public. That's a public purpose. So if it's on private land, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's exempt from Buy America. So just keep in mind that when you have these different scenarios, just please reach out to us and we will help you do the analysis to see. There might be a time that it's on private land and it doesn't look as much like a public purpose because maybe it's out in the middle of nowhere where there's no public at all. So again, we're willing to do an analysis for you, but Buy America is probably going to apply to the majority of your projects. And then one last thing, there are waivers available. DOI has a waiver, a general applicability waiver. I don't think that would apply to any of your projects. It's for any project that's under $250,000. You don't have to use the Buy America preference for those types of projects. Again, I don't know if that would apply to anything that you have, but if you go on DOI's website and just Google, waivers or Buy America, you'll get a lot of information about the process and waivers and how it could apply to your project. Next slide. All right, so program income. So program income is any kind of gross income generated through activities during your period of performance. So you're making money by doing work on your project, and then based on the terms of the award, you are authorized to allow those funds to plug more wells. But keep in mind, you have to have prior approval first. So before you earn income, you must speak to the grants officer and have it approved, and then and also have to have what work you're going to use that program income for approved as well. Some examples of program income, let's say you sell some scrap metal and you make, I don't know what you would make off of that, but let's say you sell some and you make a couple $100,000. Okay, that couple $100,000 goes back into the program. Okay, what if you get a deduction on a contract based on an exchange of some sort of scrap metal? That would be a benefit. It might not be cash, but it's a benefit where you're receiving a discount because of scrap metal. So therefore that discount, whatever that difference is, needs to be applied to the overall award. So I think that's it for me. Let's see. And it is. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Nancy. Appreciate it. So really quickly, I'm going to go over the next couple of slides relatively quickly because I want to allow enough time for questions and so we can have a robust Q&A. So just a little bit of information about subrecipients. I don't think this happens too often in or at least it didn't happen too often in the state initial award program, but here's what the distinction is between a subrecipient and a contractor. So it does require, if it's a subrecipient, that there has to be written approval. We're going to need a budget, and flow down provisions are required. They must be registered in SAM, not suspended or debarred. So just some basic things to remember, and that any subaward needs to be reported in the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act subaward reporting system. So if you have any subawards or you have some questions about it, reach out to your financial assistance agreement officer for more information. Contractors, by contrast, are a little bit different. There are also flow down provisions, but the entity is not, participating in the design of the program. So you're going to want to be sure that they're registered in SAM, they're not suspended or debarred, and that any flow down requirements are also included in the contract that you issue to your contractor, as it would be required in a subrecipient agreement. If you need a definition of what is a contractor, you can click on this hyperlink here from the 2 CFR. Pre-award costs. So in this case, and as stated in the program guidance, we've waived prior written approval. Typically, that is something that is required, but in this case, we've waived it. However, this just means that all pre-award project costs that were incurred 90 days before the effective date of the award, all costs incurred prior to the effective date, if your budget has not been approved yet, are at the recipient's risk of non-reimbursement if the costs are later determined to be unallowable, allocable, and reasonable. Please review the cost principles. If you have if you need more information, any specific questions regarding the eligibility of pre-award costs should be directed to IBC and OWPO at the email addresses we will share at the end of this presentation. Reporting requirements, this was covered a little bit earlier, both by Peter Gallagher and Neil Zimba, about there's a reporting template that must be used, as well as we did share earlier this month, and also back on June 9th, we shared a PowerPoint that was developed to assist you with completing the SF 425, which is the federal financial report. So if you've got more questions about that, always reach out to your federal financial assistance officer. The webinar that was presented previously may be helpful to you, or we can give you a copy of that PowerPoint with detailed instructions and step-by-step. And finally, property reports are required if you purchase equipment or if you have supplies in excess of $5,000 in value at the close of the performance period for your award. There is a link at the bottom of the slide that takes you to grants.gov and allows you to download the correct forms. There is a SF 4248 suite of forms. 424A is for annual reporting. 424C is for disposition request. And 424B is your final report, or 428B. And 428C is for disposition request. So again, further questions about how to manage property, remember you have to have it insured, it needs to be inventoried, and it needs to be reported back to us. So if you've got questions, please direct it to your financial assistance officer. And here's just some key action dates to keep in mind. Remember that there is a rolling deadline for this particular application process. And that expires on December 31st. As I said earlier in the presentation, don't wait till the beginning of December to see if you can get into Grant Solutions, see if you can find the materials that you need. Please contact us in September or October. Let's try to see that you're in and you're able to use it. And then we can point you to any resources that you may need that may assist you with the application process. You will get a submission receipt and acceptance via Grant Solutions. It's automatic. And you can actually see where it is in the process, if it's been accepted or returned. We will do an identification of any questions or deficiencies we may have. And remember, incomplete applications always delay the award process. We can return your application package to you in Grant Solutions and allow you to update it with new information or corrected information as needed. And when your application is complete, we'll prepare a funding recommendation memo by IBC and OWPO. And then just some other key dates to think about. In your award document, you want to pay close attention to the period of performance on the award. It's listed in box 6 of the notice of award, as also in the terms and conditions. When an award is made, the notice of award will contain an attachment of the terms and conditions, some of which we covered here today, some of which we didn't have time to cover. But it's always good to read those documents when they're issued to you, raise questions before, early on in the process so that we can work with you. As Nancy said, if you've got, Buy America questions, you've got other questions about Davis-Bacon implementation, we can refer you to the correct resources. The award date is the date we issue the award. Every award document must be signed by a financial assistance officer of the IBC. Once the period of performance begins, funds will be transferred to your ASAP account. And finally, here's some resources to contact us. Please note, IBC does have a new email address, so you can start using this now. If you have questions about the state formula guidance, as well as the OWPO office, that is their email address. And then these are all hyperlinks to a lot of the documents that we talked about in today's presentation, including the grant guidance, state formula FAQ document, and Grant Solutions. Finally, I am going to open it up for questions, and we have approximately 16 minutes. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A